This week on the Virtual Skeptics, Bob fires Canada. Eve is going down with the ship, and Tim is getting a bit political. I'm your host, Tim Farley. I've taken over from Brian Gregory, struck down by the flu or something. And this is Virtual Skeptics. I'm going to kill the music there and unplug so I don't annoy everybody. Hi, everybody.
Hello.
Small crew tonight. Brian had to beg out at the last minute due to the various bugs that are going around, I guess. So we're going to have a small panel tonight.
And
Brian,
we're taking bets on what he has. All right. So make sure that you get your guess on the Twitter feed, okay? On the hashtag.
Okay, that'll be the replacement because I don't have any screens behind me. And so tonight our panel is Bob Blazkowicz, CSI's conspiracy guy, web columnist, blogger for Skeptical Humanities, and Skepticality contributor, along with Eve Siebert, editor and blogger at Skeptical Humanities and contributor to Skepticality and Insight at Skeptic.com. And me. I'm a blogger at SkepTools and Insight at Skeptic.com, a Skepticality contributor, and a creator of What's the Harm, and a former JREF fellow. And I click a lot of buttons and have like 9 laptops going here. Whoops. So here we are. You can talk to us if you're watching us live on Wednesday. You can talk to us via the Virtual Skeptics hashtag or in the comments on YouTube. We should have the Q&A app running. I think it's running, so you can ask us questions there, and I'll try to keep up with it amongst my many other duties. So first up, we have our trivia question for this week, and this week, I believe it's this week. The sources vary on this. I had a source that said it was this week, and other sources say May. But either way, it was 100 years ago in a New York City court that a woman by the name of Evangeline Adams got a judge to declare her pseudoscience completely legit. He declared that it was actual science and let her off on a charge of fraud. What was the pseudoscience involved? What pseudoscience did Evangeline Adams get in trouble in court for 100 years ago in New York? And that's the trivia question, so try to answer that. Let me refresh my stuff here. And, all right, so I am going first, I think. To make it even more confusing?
So.
Yes. We should have changed
Way to monopolize the show, Farley.
Well, actually, why don't I let Bob go first?
Oh,
because it's easier for me to... Because... sorry to whack you, Bob. But seriously, I need to pay attention to who's answering the trivia questions so I know who gets it first. I can't do that if I'm talking. So Bob will go first.
Okay, so my story today, it's taken me in a number of different directions. And I'll explain where the problems came in with some of the assumptions I brought to it and how it kind of tripped me up a little bit. But all I know is that in Calgary right now, in Canada, again, I have a lot of problems with Canada lately, and I don't know if that country's just falling apart or what. But so in May of 2011, Calgary stopped putting fluoride in its water. As CBC reported at the time, quote, Alderman Drew Farrell, it's D-R-U-H, Drew, which is one letter away from duh, who brought forward the motion to drop fluoride, described Thursday as long awaited. It's the culmination of many years of work, and we've been through the discussion several times. Now we'll look at what to do with the residual funds, the $750,000 we would spend annually. I'm guessing repairing children's teeth is what you're going to end up wasting that money on, but that's beside that's just me. So Uh, Farrell is the alderman representing Eau Claire, Calgary. I thought that was interesting, since I'm in Eau Claire right now. Her
But not
position,
Calgary.
huh?
But not Calgary.
Yeah. Uh, what state are we in?
Wisconsin.
That's the one with the cheese. So, Alderwoman Farrell's position can be traced in the Canadian press back to at least 2007. In 2008, she said in an interview with the Calgary Herald, I'm quoting the paper, she's concerned by new information on the damaging effects of fluoridating water and thinking of bringing the issue to council. It always makes sense to review new information, said Farrell. Water fluoridation has been a heavily debated topic in Calgary and around Canada for decades. I personally have never been in favor of medicating our drinking water, said Farrell. She said that it's, quote, considered a serious poison and questions whether it's effective. She points to studies that link water fluoridation to hyperthyroidism and other health problems. Okay, it always makes sense to review new information. However, you have to look at it in the context of all the available information, not just focus on the new stuff. You also have to be competent in order to evaluate the new evidence that's available to you in order to gauge the relative significance and soundness of this new information. Okay, she's repeating some anti-fluoride tropes, that it's a poison. You know, a lot of times people are saying it's a byproduct of industry. It's a toxic waste, and in some concentrations, it is poisonous. It is a toxic waste. But we're not talking about, you know, when we're talking about drinking water, we're not talking about you know, concentrated fluoride. You know, sucking it straight from, you know, the hazardous waste barrel. You know what I mean? We're talking about something that's 0.7 parts per million, which was the dose in Canada. And one of the interesting things is that the newspaper that was reporting most of this was the Calgary Herald, and they actually supported her position back in the day. Peer-reviewed research linking fluoridation with more serious diseases shouldn't be ignored. A 2006 paper produced by Harvard University researchers found boys were at greater risk of developing bone cancer during their teenage years if exposed to more fluoride during critical bone growth years of 5 to 10-year-olds. Now, this is actually kind of dishonest on the part of the newspaper. In 2011, the same scientists reported that their subsequent research didn't find an increased risk of osteosarcoma. And even in the study that was cited by the paper back then, and has since been partially parroted by Endless Cranks, the Harvard researchers found that their conclusion should be taken with a grain of salt because they're newer data. And I'm reliably informed that it always makes sense to review newer information. See what I did there? Okay. The new data was not showing a relationship between osteosarcoma and fluoride, so, you know, to be careful with it, but they ran with it anyway, which is kind of unbelievable. In 2009, when the issue came up again, the alder person attacked the fluoridation system on the basis that the upgrade to the water treatment facility that would be fluoridating the water would be expensive, something like $6 million, and then that $600,000 being spent annually on fluoridation might be better spent on other things. And I actually have seen a number of different figures bandied around, so, and hers is clearly on the high end, so I'm not sure that she's entirely reliable. This was the same year that she made a motion to remove fluoride without public input. That was rejected, but by 2011, enough people had been scared to convince the city council to vote to end fluoridation after a heated 10.5-hour public hearing, which must have been delightful. So the question is, how'd that work out for you, Calgary? Could you bring up the first image, please?
Yeah. Whoops.
Okay.
And there's my joke.
That's for Brian's segment.
There we go.
All right. I have no idea what it says right now. Hold on. Dental decay rampant in Calgary children. Pediatric dentist says. Now, this is where I started to run into problems because it turns out it's just a pediatric dentist. In fact, there are two very vocal dentists in Calgary who seem to be spearheading the effort to reinstitute fluoridation. The council decided to remove fluoridation against the recommendation of everybody involved with health, the Canadian Dental Association, and best recommendations of professionals in the field, which you always do at your own peril. But the thing is, when I found this, I saw this on the Skeptic Reddit, and it got huge upvotes on Reddit. And it says, well, typical, they get rid of fluoridation, and now the Calgary cavity rate is skyrocketing in children. And actually, we don't have the evidence to reliably say that. They are biting off more than you. I don't think it's a stretch to imagine that's happening, because that's what happened when you stop it. But that's not what this is saying. This is actually just a couple of dentists saying that it is, based on what they're observing in their practices. Not rigorous enough to, in my opinion, to have informed debate about it. However, I think that the evidence is already in on fluoride and that it is beneficial. But it seemed odd to me. It was very frustrating because I started this, doing the story based, and this was my mistake, on the headline from Reddit, and started working the story and going back through the newspapers and through the history and seeing, how this unfolded. And then I got back finally to look at, now up to date, oh, it's just a couple of people. And it's 6:15. No! And one thing that got me, okay, fine, I blew it. Yeah. But I do think that I'm a bad person and should be shamed publicly.
Yeah, but look at the little face of the little cougar on that slide.
That is a sweet little face on that cougar, and it will one day rip yours off, right?
Yeah, but it just will make you feel better.
Yeah. Oh, little tickleums. We tickled the little guy. Yeah. So there is a study that was launched last year that will look at the rate of cavities in the population, but the results are not in yet. So they're still working on. What these people are worried about is cavities in very young children. Sometimes cavities before they have they even have all their teeth, and they say that that's going up. And they make a number of interesting points about how cavities can be painful, and they can be embarrassing and all sorts of stuff. But their argument was still, anecdotal. We have to wait to see what the outcome of that more systematic study is. I don't have a date of when that'll be out.
I heard this spring.
In the spring?
That's what I heard.
How the hell did you hear that?
It was in one of the articles.
Oh, okay.
Or at least one of the ones I found.
Okay.
Aren't very small children one of the reasons that the argument is to fluoridate? I mean, adults in theory can use fluoride mouthwash and toothpaste and whatnot.
Yeah,
but
and there have been some, one of the things that they wanted to do was redirect fluoridation campaign, fluoridation and mouth oral health programs into grade schools. But yeah, it's the really small kids who will need attention, who need the water just to be
Right.
fluoridated. my one of the weird things, though, that I was looking through the Cochrane database, I figured, okay, well, maybe my little excursion into the Canadian press was a little misguided, but maybe I could go back and look at the systematic studies in the Cochrane database, and I couldn't find anything for the rates of cavities with fluoridated water. And if somebody can find me those original studies, that would be interesting to see. They'd be nice to have on hand. But I see like what I saw was a lot of stuff about like fluoride sealants on teeth and gels and stuff like that, and toothpaste and milk, but I wasn't seeing anything. They all kind of assumed that the background of kids getting fluoridated water was what they were comparing against. So,
right. Yeah, it's the placebo. Well, not the placebo, but it's your sort of your ground level. Yeah, maybe Cochrane. I don't know, because fluoridated water is an interesting area because it's not really a medical trial. It's more of a public health thing.
Mm-hmm.
So maybe Cochrane considers that out of scope because most of the trials
they have an entire Cochrane area based on oral health where they talk about cavities.
Right, but it's not specifically a medical intervention that a doctor would choose or not choose to do based on studies.
Okay.
What a lot of medical studies are. I don't know. I don't know if that's where Cochrane draws the line, but it seems like many of the studies they talk about are things like, should we use this drug, should we not use this drug, that kind of stuff.
Okay, I was thinking, doing an analysis, a large group analysis of these studies is what I was looking for.
Yeah.
So maybe that's out there in public health. Maybe I'm looking in the wrong journals.
It would seem like someone has done it because we've been doing fluoridation and doing studies on fluoridation for over half a century at least, so there's got to be hundreds of studies.
I think it's sense of depression. And in the early 50s, by the end of the war, things were picking up and fluoride was being added. Well,
it was 1950, I think, when the U.S. Public Health Organization made it the official recommendation. Mm-hmm. Did you want to use the rest of your slides, or are you done?
The next slide is gross.
So gross.
Yeah.
Yeah. Oops. And I thought this was actually, because it's like you have these, I don't know who these people are or what their history is, but they just kind of added like the worst possible scenario, pictures of the worst possible scenarios.
Right.
And it's just, it kind of goes along. Is two dentists saying that they're seeing a rise, is that really in itself newsworthy? And then if not, why are you adding these nightmarish pictures?
Well, on the other hand, if these pseudoscientific fluoride people are dominating the conversation, isn't this better than not saying anything at all?
I think that's the thing. It's kind of a compromise. And Tim, if you're willing to have your morals compromised, no. No. I think that's what it is. I mean, what I saw was a lot of false balance going the other way, leading up to the ban, and now a lot of slanted stuff the other way. And you wonder why it's been one of the hottest, a hotly debated issue. Certainly the press is playing a part in it. They're fueling the fire on both sides.
Right.
But ultimately, when this alderman's, teeth fall out, then we'll see who's laughing, and it'll be the USA, USA, USA.
Way to make it a jingoistic thingy competition.
Bob just hates Canada.
Yeah.
I really like Canada. I just think it needs help. An intervention of sorts.
All right. I'm going to go now that we've had a chance for the trivia answer to be answered. And I'm going to talk pretty quickly about politics, which I never talk about. A lot of skeptics don't like to get political, In fact, over at the Insight blog, where I blog sometimes, we explicitly have a rule where we don't blog about political topics. We try to stick with scientific and things that can be analyzed. But one of the issues is, and Bob's story is a good example, a lot of these scientific questions end up getting resolved in a legislative way, whether it's, revoking fluoridation or creating fluoridation or other laws. And there was another legislative thing that came up today, and actually Science-Based Medicine had covered this last month, and we didn't talk about it. But it showed up in Slate, and what it is back in the summer, the state legislature of New York State was lobbied, basically, very vigorously by a bunch of people, and in typical fashion, they put forth a law that's going to have a much more sweeping effect than what they're actually after. And it all comes down, it all got kicked off by a concept called chronic Lyme disease. Now, if you Google chronic Lyme disease...
No, you know what? Don't Google it.
Yeah, don't Google it. Unless you use my skeptical Google search, bit.ly/skepsearch with capital S's. Because chronic Lyme disease is a bunch of hokum. It's basically a few doctors and a few folks have pushed this idea, and that you can get Lyme disease and have it for the rest of your life. And there's no basis for it in reality, but there's a lot of folks who are convinced. Either they've convinced themselves or a quack doctor has convinced them that they have this chronic version of Lyme disease and feeds them basically antibiotics all the time, which of course is not a great idea. It's also been shown that these constant antibiotics doesn't solve the problem, but they make a lot of money for somebody. The interesting thing about it is that Lyme disease itself, and chronic Lyme disease in particular, is as anti-vax often is, and many of these trends is, a disease of affluence. If you're affluent enough to sit around Googling things and spend money on antibiotics that you don't need, you can have chronic Lyme disease. And as a result, the same folks who are affluent and have been, and it happens that actual Lyme disease happens to hit affluent neighborhoods because the deer ticks that actually carry Lyme disease show up in neighborhoods in areas like the suburbs of New York City and things like that are often very affluent neighborhoods. And they talk about this in the Slate thing. And of course these affluent people were able to lobby the state legislature. Well, what they've proposed is this law that basically tells the Office of Professional Medical Conduct in New York, which is the regulatory agency that makes sure doctors aren't acting like quacks, that they can't, cannot bring a case of medical misconduct that is, quote, based solely on treatment that is not universally accepted by the medical profession. Which, if you listen to those words carefully, is a ridiculous thing to say on its face, because nothing is universally accepted by the medical profession except maybe put a Band-Aid on a cut, or some of the most simplest interventions. So anything more serious, there's always, well, we could do it this way, we could do it that way. There's always multiple ways to proceed. And clearly it's intended, and it's well known that it's intended to let these quack Lyme practitioners get away with what they're doing and not be sued or investigated by the state authorities for what they're doing. And it's basically gotten to the point where it's sitting on the governor's desk, and the governor has indicated that he's going to sign it, and it's going to be free rein for quacks in New York. And so if you live in New York, or Well, if you live in New York, you should be aware of this, and
Well,
you should be contacting the governor's office and ask him not to sign it.
and you know what would be an interesting way of getting the word out really quick? You might, send up a flare with Skeptical Inquirer in the hashtag, or maybe ask Skeptical Inquirer what they're doing. They're based in Buffalo.
Yeah.
They are regional, and they may have access. And ask them if they're doing something to fight this.
I believe they are aware of it because I think I saw this link in their morning news link thingamajig this morning. Oh, no, that's right. I didn't see that. Yeah, so I will pass the link along, actually. That's an excellent idea. I forgot that CFI is based in Buffalo. So,
this is their territory. They're the ones who have
right.
to stop it.
Well, and they have a big campaign about safe and secular, which is their, keep pseudoscience and keep religion out of medical treatment decisions and regulations. So, this is a bugaboo. And if you're interested in legislation in particular of alt-med, you should be following anything written by Jan Bellamy over at the Science-Based Medicine blog. They keep track of all of this stuff. Like there's been efforts to let chiropractors prescribe medicine and to legitimize naturopaths in different states. And Jan Bellamy keeps track of all this stuff. So, keep an eye on that name, and you can keep track of what's going on in alt-med regulation. And this has been kind of a pet peeve of mine that skeptics dropped the ball on this for some time. If any of you saw the plenary talk I gave at TAM 2012, a big section of it was me basically pointing out where skeptics basically blew it. Back in 2010, there was an effort at the congressional level, at the national level in the United States, to change a law called DSHEA, which is a terrible, terrible law that basically lets you sell any herbal crap that you want as long as it's not, like, obviously poisonous, with no proof of efficacy or anything. And skeptics grouse about this law and say that this law should be changed. And in 2010, there was a bill proposed by some fairly highly placed people in Congress to change this law, and it had the backing of a bunch of major organizations, including the NFL, NCAA, major sports organizations, because what had happened was a bunch of athletes had gotten stung in basically doping tests, and the reason was they weren't doping. They had taken herbal remedies that they had bought at like a store like GNC or one of those stores, thinking, oh, this is herbal, this can't possibly be illegal, and it turned out it actually had illegal drugs in it, or regulated drugs.
Banned substances.
Yes, banned substances, or at least regulated substances in terms of the doping rules, and these guys got thrown out under the regs, and it's like, hey, that brought it under the attention. So there was this huge effort, and it died on the vine. Now, if you remember back in 2010, and actually for the last 8 years in Congress, maybe or more, there's been a lot of gridlock and stupidity. So maybe that law never had a chance. But if you look in skeptic blogs and you Google that law, nobody stood up for it in the skeptic movement. There was no effort amongst us to lobby for it, to say it was a good idea, to get our folks to write their congressmen, any of the things that you normally do when a law like that comes along. And so, this is the reason why, I'm not a super
nice things.
Huh?
It's the reason why we can't have nice things.
Yeah, it's the reason we can't have nice things. We can grouse about these laws, but when we have allies like that, there aren't a lot of skeptics, and we're not going to get along like that past ourselves. But, when you have people like the NFL on your side, you need to take advantage of those opportunities and jump in the game. And sure enough, the alt-metters jumped in the game with both feet, and there are thousands of blog posts. You can still find them. If you Google things like McCain wants to take your herbal remedies away and stuff like that, because it was John McCain was one of the sponsors of the bill. And they just basically inundated a bunch of senators with negative email, and so that bill never went anywhere.
And one of the other things about that is it's been frustrating trying to do that type of work. Trying to rally people to, and you can't, like when I work on, say, Brzezinski stuff and cancer stuff, I can't expect people to feel the same way about it as I do. I find it, what a hell of a life so many people would have if they all, were worried about this stuff as weirdly as I am. But it seems just like there is no organization. The alt-med, they have the infrastructure and they have the money. We have the smarts and the,
right.
And yeah.
Part of it is the herding cat syndrome, is that we don't like to be organized. We're iconoclasts by nature, skeptics are. So we don't like to follow leaders, and we don't like
follow the evidence. We're getting clobbered. So
yeah.
Fucking get in line.
I don't know what the solution of it is, but we need to at least pay attention a little bit. So New York, keep an eye out. And that's all I have. So let's go on to, well, wait. We have Brian. Brian never did join us, but here's Brian's slide.
We're just guessing here.
We're just guessing. We're guessing that that's what Brian would be talking about. Okay.
Between moans.
Yeah. That was Bob's joke. Okay. So on to Eve, who's going to talk about our old friend Ken Ham.
Yep. So on a lighter note and less medical, what's new, you may be asking, with Ken Ham and Ark Encounter?
I wasn't.
Where do I begin? What?
I wasn't.
You were. You know you were. Now, Ken Ham, of course, is the grand poobah of Answers in Genesis, the Young Earth Creationist website, as well as the Creation Museum in Kentucky, and the not really a thing yet Ark Encounter theme park, which will feature a full-scale replica of Noah's Ark without animals. Well, at least without wild animals, because the Zoo Authority or whoever's in charge of that went, no, you can't put animals in that. Anyway, the Creation Museum's popularity has been steadily declining since its novelty has worn off, and it's had to add purely secular attractions or amusements like zip lines. So far as I know, only one person, an employee, has been hit by lightning on the zip lines. Not fatally or seriously, fortunately. Meanwhile, Ark Encounter has been plagued with problems from the beginning. Building's been delayed, the project's been scaled back.
And it's stupid.
Eventually, well, yeah. They eventually still want to or plan to build the whole ridiculously expensive enchilada, but for now, Phase 1 is much more modest than originally intended. They haven't gotten the donations they've wanted or expected, and there's been problems with the sweet, sweet tax incentives they've been offered by the state of Kentucky. Aww. So in 2011, Ark Encounter received approval for tax incentives on the whole $172.5 million project. They would have been able to get to keep 25% of the sales tax they collected for 10 years. But as I said, Ark Encounter has been plagued by financial woes, so they ended up withdrawing that application and reapplying this year for only the first $73 million phase. Now, all along, some dastardly pinko evolutionists have expressed concerns about the Constitution and stuff, and the constitutionality of these incentives. A government entity is financially supporting an overtly religious group in an overtly fundamentalist Christian project. Answers in Genesis has sort of been tap dancing around this. Their justification is complicated, but has to do with what company owns what. I'll just quote an article from the Louisville Courier-Journal. The coordinator of the project, Mark Zovath, said Friday that the entity developing the park, the for-profit Ark Encounter LLC, is distinct from the not-for-profit Answers in Genesis. However, Zovath, a founding member of Answers in Genesis, acknowledges Ark Encounter is owned by Crosswater Canyon, a nonprofit owned by Answers in Genesis. So that's clear. Anyway, recently, Americans United for the Separation of Church and State has raised concerns about Ark Encounter's hiring practices. And they've been raising concerns from the beginning, but specifically recently about the hiring practices. Earlier this year, Answers in Genesis posted a job listing for a computer-aided design technician specifically to work on Ark Encounter. The job posting said applicants, quote, need to supply a written statement of their testimony, a statement of what they believe regarding creation, and a statement that they have read and can support the AIG Statement of Faith, unquote. Now, the Statement of Faith is a fascinating document. It begins, in order to preserve the function and integrity of the ministry in its mission to proclaim the absolute truth and authority of Scripture and to provide a biblical role model to our employees and to the church, the community, and society at large, it is imperative that all persons employed by the ministry in any capacity or who serve as volunteers should abide by and agree to our statement of faith to include the statement on marriage and sexuality and conduct themselves accordingly. Unquote.
So no gay marrying while on the job.
Well, here's some nuggets from the Statement of Faith. The 66 books of the Bible are the written Word of God. I didn't even know he had parchment. Whatever. The Bible is divinely inspired and inerrant throughout. Those who do not believe in Christ are subject to everlasting conscious punishment, but believers enjoy eternal life with God. The only legitimate marriage sanctioned by God is the joining of one man and one woman in a single exclusive union as delineated in Scripture. God intends sexual intimacy to only... Yeah. Well, no. We went to the Creation Museum. No. God intends sexual intimacy to only occur between a man and woman who are married to each other, and has commanded that no intimate sexual activity be engaged in outside of a marriage between a man and a woman. Any form of sexual immorality, such
sexual
as adultery,
immortality!
I almost said that, yeah. Sexual immorality, such as adultery, fornication, homosexuality, lesbianism, bisexual conduct, bestiality, incest, pornography, or any attempt to change one's gender or disagreement with one's biological gender is sinful and offensive to God, because God told them, apparently. There's also stuff about attitudes toward abortion and science and stuff. As I said, there's more. There's much, much more. Zovath, however...
You make them sound like they're authoritarian pricks. You know that?
I know. I'm being unfair reading what they write. Anyway. Zovoth tried to get around this by saying that this was a posting for a job with answers in Genesis. Although the employee will be working on the ARC project, he or she will not be working for ARC Encounter. He says they haven't started hiring for ARC Encounter yet and haven't yet set the hiring policy. Asked how they would respond to a homosexual, for instance, applying for a job at ARC Encounter, he said, "That's a good question." So good a question, he didn't actually answer it.
Oh, that's a bad answer.
But he claims they will follow federal and state laws to a T. Alex Luchinister, Associated Legal Director for Americans United, isn't convinced, and tourism officials have asked for assurances that ARC Encounter won't discriminate on the basis of religion before giving final approval for the incentives. So how is Ken Ham dealing with these difficulties? With a billboard campaign, of course.
Jesus. The man exists, like his entire public life is lived through a billboard.
Pretty much.
Unbelievable.
They, as Bob has suggested, have used billboards before to drum up business. And some of them have actually been kind of cool looking. You have two examples.
That's a dragon.
Slides. There were dragon ones too, but I chose a couple.
No, that's a dragon.
Dinosaurs. Is it?
Dragons are dinosaurs.
Well, that's true, but they have some more directly dragony ones. So, sorry, lost my place. Now they have a new billboard campaign to counter, and I quote, modern-day ARC legends being spread far and wide by secularists who are seeking to hinder the ARC Encounter project because, you see, these, again I quote, Bible scoffers and various anti-Christian groups, these agitators outside the state, are trying to affect the project by spreading misinformation and putting pressure on the state of Kentucky to undermine the project. Bastards! So they're putting up billboards such as this one, that's the next slide, in Louisville, Lexington, and Frankfort, Kentucky. Also and there is one up already, I think, and a 15-second digital video display in Times Square, which is, as far as I know, not actually in Kentucky. The billboards...
Well, no, they're trying to take the message to the out-of-state people.
Yeah. The billboards lead... I think they've done that before, gone with the Times Square thing. I think it's right above the Disney store or something. I don't know. The billboards lead people to find the facts on Answers in Genesis's website.
Could you go back to that? Go ahead.
Although, of course, that's completely separate from ARC Encounter. And there on the website you'll find that ARC Encounter will not be receiving tax dollars because, quote, no unwilling taxpayers will see their tax dollars used to build the ARC. The money involved from the Kentucky Tourism Tax Incentive only concerns sales tax that will be collected from people who voluntarily visit the completed ARC when it is fully operational. Which it seems to me a nice bit of sophistry because although it's not coming from unwilling donors, if that money were not going to ARC Encounter, it would be going to Kentucky taxpayers in some sort of useful way, perhaps. Regardless, it also notes that while they haven't determined hiring policies, it's okay for them to discriminate because there is an exception for religious institutions.
What?
Yeah.
What?
How this works, along with their "we're not the nonprofit Answers in Genesis, we're a for-profit business" argument, is just too complicated for me to figure out.
I believe it's fuck you, we don't care.
Yeah, it kind of seems that way. Regardless, though, you've got to admire the beautiful passive aggressiveness of that billboard.
Oh, that's
Which is
what I
addressed
wanted to
to
talk about. Oh my God, that's the most
our
impressive thing I've ever read.
Liberal friends.
Oh my God, he is just a bitter snot.
Yeah.
Unreal. That was the funniest part of the whole slideshow, was how passive aggressive that was. Wow.
Oh boy.
And that's it.
Oh well. Thank you, Eve. It's amazing how often billboards come up in so many contexts. They seem to have become so popular. All right, so we are at the point where we're winding down. I guess Brian is not going to join us late. There was some speculation. Don't see any questions that we need to answer. Although Alex Murdoch said that there's currently a bill before the Canadian Parliament that mentions chronic Lyme disease in its preamble. So, Bob, you're going to have an even more of a reason to hate Canada.
God damn it, Canada. Just, just crawl out of your can of Labatt's and just...
All right. So, let's see. Who got our trivia question? The trivia question was 100 years ago, I think tomorrow, maybe in May, a New York City magistrate ruled what pseudoscience to be an actual science and let Evangeline Adams go. Some people were guessing palm reading, but Alex Murdoch got it right. It was, actually it was Pierre got it first, but Alex was very closely behind him. And the correct answer is astrology. She actually gave a reading for the judge's son, and the judge found the reading so accurate that he decided, obviously this is a real science, I'm going to let you go. And so obviously she capitalized on that for years afterwards and later had a popular radio show. Do we have any announcements?
What was her name again?
Evangeline Adams. One of many kind of celebrity astrologers over the years in the United States. I didn't see any announcements in the notes. Did you have any, Bob, Eve? Any last-minute announcements?
No, I've got nothing.
There was no skepticality this week. Okay, so who wants to go first with book time?
Okay, I can go.
All right, Bob, go.
In 1898, H.G. Wells published The War of the Worlds, a vivid and influential novel. A mysterious cylinder crashes to Earth. Its top opens to release gray octopus-like creatures with tentacles and rimless lips that, quote, drool saliva and quiver and pulsate. Don't be scared, Tim. Wielding huge fighting machines, the creatures attack New York City with flaming gas, which Brian might be doing. In 1938, Orson Welles and his Mercury Theater broadcast a radio adaptation that became instantly famous. And then they repeat some stuff that's not true.
I like drool saliva as opposed to drooling fire.
Well, it's true. It's true. Let me see. Major update today on the Ark Park. Thanks to who sent that? It's Jeb. Jeb Card said that Kentucky has withdrawn tax incentives for the Ark Park.
Yes!
The ship is sunk.
Awesome.
Woohoo!
Awesome.
Going down with the ship, Eve.
Yeah.
Well, that's good news.
Apparently. Excellent. I can read my book now.
Hurrah.
Ken Ham is angry. All right, Eve, you got your book?
Yes. A cover-up? Yes, my main purpose for writing this book is to reveal something that should be common knowledge, but has been covered up for over 100 years. That dinosaurs did not go extinct 65 million years ago, and that humans coexisted with them. Leaders of the Roman Inquisition covered up the ideas of heliocentrists by banning them and declaring them heretical. Our scientists today intentionally withhold research that clearly shows our coexistence with dinosaurs, while feeding us a cover story of a 65 million year gap. Accepting this story as truth, our teachers and media then pass it on to us, thus perpetuating it in a vicious circle. We will examine this cover-up more closely later.
All right. And I'm going to pull the trick I've pulled before and read something that's not actually a book. It is a bill to be entitled an act to prohibit and prevent the teaching or sanctioning of the so-called Darwin or other theory of evolution of man from the ape, monkey, or other lower animal in the public schools and colleges and other institutions supporting or receiving support from the state and for other purposes. Section 1. Be it enacted by the General Assembly of the State of Georgia, and it is hereby enacted by the authority of the same, that from and after the passages of this act it shall be illegal and unlawful to teach, sanction, and or approve of the so-called Darwin or other theory of the evolution of man from the ape, the monkey, or other lower animal in the public schools and colleges or other institutions of the state supported or receiving support from the state. Be it enacted by the authority aforesaid that any school, college, or other institution violating the provisions of the preceding section shall not participate or share in the distribution of the public school funds or any other fund or funds provided by the state. Bob, what was your book?
My book was Susan Clancy's Abducted: How People Come to Believe They Were Kidnapped by Aliens.
Ooh,
Shiny.
Yes.
that's shiny. Eve?
Mine is 100-year cover-up revealed. We lived with dinosaurs! Exclamation point, revised edition. James Edward Gilmer, PhD, apparently. Which really small.
In Wahology?
Yeah, and that might be a mosaic on there, Bob. I'm not sure.
And my book that was not a book, as you could guess, was a bill that was attempted to be enacted in July 1924 in Georgia. Our friends at the National Center for Science Education were doing some research, and they wanted to see what these bills in Georgia back in the heyday of anti-evolution, 24, 25 was the Scopes trial. And it happens that the Georgia Archives will not send copies of stuff like this unless you actually show up in person. So a few weeks ago I went down there and went through security, and actually this is a Xerox copy, but I actually got to see the actual piece of paper that was used at the time. It was kind of fascinating to see how that stuff gets stored and dig through. We weren't able to find everything they were looking for, but we were able to find that one and a couple of other bills and see the actual signatures of the legislators on them and stuff like that and get copies made. So I think we are done in record time for recently. We're actually in our time slot.
Huh.
If you need to go to some 9 o'clock hangout, you can make it on time for once. Unless anybody has something else to talk about.
Yeah, we just have to dance for 5 minutes, I guess.
Oh, okay. I mean, maybe we'll play the theme song all the way through if you can stand the buzzing sound that it generates. All right, well, now it is time to dance. Oops. All right, The Virtual Skeptics is an independent production of whatsaharm.net, Skeptical Humanities, Brian Gregory, not really tonight, ICBS Everywhere, and Doubtful News. Our logo was designed by Sarah Mayhew at sarahmayhew.com, and our theme music is by Musicant and is used with permission.